Withering Light was a unique ability. After activation, it was similar to a halo effect, but it could not be stacked. The HP reduction was not much, but the advantage was that it continued to reduce HP. This characteristic was very advantageous in a long tug-of-war. Another unique feature was that it was not Matthew's mana that was used to activate and maintain this ability. It was the soul fire of the chosen undead. In a sense, this was a mutual destruction. However, Matthew did not care about this flaw. Would a necromancer lack cannon fodder? He looked at the densely packed kobolds and silvermoon zombies in front of him. Matthew felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Withering Light is also a perfect ability for corpse explosion, but the casting distance is not far enough. In fact, summoning so many undead creatures at the same time, Matthew also realized that his control range was reaching its limit. This was not only related to mana but also to vision. Matthew looked around. Soon, he locked onto a tall oak tree. In the next moment, he transformed into a raven and spread his wings while he flew. At this moment, the moonlight was strong, and Matthew did not sway forward at all when he entered the wilderness form. His movements were very smooth. With a few flops, he successfully arrived at the top of the tree. After transforming back into his human form, Matthew stood still and looked ahead. His vision suddenly widened, and his control over the undead creatures returned to a steady level of proficiency. At this moment, the owl Ella flew over. She shouted nervously, "Matthew, there are too many enemies. I'm a little afraid. I don't dare to fight with you. I can only give you some help within my ability." As she spoke, a white light appeared from her body and quickly entered Matthew's body. Hint, you have received the high-level blessing of Ella, the soul of nature, elegance of the wind. Elegance of the wind, your evasion has been greatly increased. Evasion was a good attribute. Before Matthew could thank her, another white light suddenly flew over from the crown of the oak tree and sank into his body. Hint, you have received very Princess Lulu's high-level blessing, good luck bang bang. Good luck bang bang, your luck has been greatly improved. Matthew looked down. Below the tree crown, a group of oak tree fairies were talking about something. Then, they cheered Matthew on. As for the shy Lulu, after casting the advanced blessing, it disappeared without a trace. However, Matthew still felt that his chances of winning were greatly increased with the two high-level blessings. He knew that even for nature's soul, casting a high-level blessing was extremely taxing. This could be seen from Ella's listless state. Lulu was probably no exception. I must guard the oak forest. Matthew turned his firm gaze back to the battlefield. Just as the enemy was completing their deployment and preparation, the first reinforcement from Rolling Stone Town was already in position. It was the garrison led by Blake. There were about 20 people. They were also well equipped and well armed. However, they did not have horses, so they arrived a little slower. Under Matthew and Blake's communication, this group of guards was arranged behind the undead creatures, forming the second line of defense in the north of the oak forest. If Matthew's undead army was broken through, then they would have to face the enemy head-on. The Knights of the Lord's Guards were arranged between the front line and the eastern firewall. This meant that they could cut into the battlefield from both sides at any time to complete tasks such as breaking the array. However, even territorial disputes were rare these days. In recent years, the knights only had the experience of exterminating bandits and expelling kobolds. On the real battlefield, whether they could display actual combat strength was still a big question mark. Zeller and his elemental guarded the eastern route. No matter what, they could not let the Gnoll attack the farm area. This was the consensus of Matthew and the others. However, in this way, the pressure of the main battlefield was almost completely on Matthew. But Matthew was not afraid at all. Instead, he became even more excited. Because this was what a necromancer should be like in his dreams. One person could defend against tens of millions of enemies. Boiling. The bone dragon that was hiding among the undead lowered its head. The flickering soul fire made it look even more mysterious and majestic. It's here. Matthew's eyes narrowed. At the very front, the wild Borman warrior carrying the flag was the first to charge into the kobold zombies. Withering light. Matthew immediately ignited the soul fire of a few zombies. Gray light filled with negative energy shot out from the bodies of the undead and quickly enveloped the body of the wild boar warrior. However, the latter was not afraid at all. He did not even use the huge axe on his back. Instead, he held the flag with both hands and waved it left and right as if he was sweeping the ground. Walala. The zombies in front of the wild boar men were sent flying. The kobolds on both sides that were hit by his battle flag were also sent flying in the air like trash that had been swept away. What a powerful warrior! Matthew's eyelids twitched. The undead army was not as resilient as the human infantry. At the same time, the Borman warrior's physique was too terrifying. No one could stand up to him. Matthew noticed that he had a dark red luster similar to Anderson's. This guy's position in the order of calamity was obviously not low. It looked like the fierce wild Borman warrior was about to tear through the defense line with his own strength. Matthew could only order the bone dragon to intercept the Borman. An unwillingness came from the contract. However, Filey still charged forward aggressively. Rumble. The skeletal dragon trotted over and charged forward. The undead in front of it moved away. The wild Borman warrior shouted, "Perfect timing." He threw away his battle flag and charged at the bone dragon with his giant axe. Behind him, the low-profile Dracon warrior followed closely behind with a glowing magic sword in his hand. He chanted a spell in a low voice. Every few seconds, a layer of light appeared on the body of the wild Borman warrior. When he arrived in front of the bone dragon, the wild Borman seemed to be wearing colorful neon lights, which looked quite scary. These two are obviously old partners. Fortunately, the troll and the drow didn't join them. Matthew felt a lot of pressure. These two Tier 4 adventurers were too ruthless. The Dracon man did not even make a move, and the undead on the battlefield was almost scattered by the boar men. This made Matthew eager to have a dark night or death night. Just one bone dragon was still too weak. In his thoughts, Filey was about to collide head-on with the wild Borman warrior, but Filey was quite cunning. During the process of charging, it had always held back its strength. Just as it was about to collide, it suddenly changed its direction and tilted to the side. "Where are you going?" The wild Borman raised his battle axe and slashed in the direction the bone dragon turned. In the next second, bang! This sweeping tail hit the wild Borman right in the face. Almost instantly, his face was torn into a bloody mess, and his entire body was sent flying. "Good job. How sinister." Matthew praised in surprise. From this exchange, it could be seen that Filey was not someone who only knew how to bully the weak. It also had its own unique understanding of battles between people of the same level. However, Matthew's happiness only lasted for less than 2 seconds. In the smoke, a fluorescent light shot into the sky. Unlike the wild Borman's brash bravery, the Dracon's charge was more elegant. His footsteps were steady, and his speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he had rushed to little Filey's side. Puff! Filey was caught off guard, and the Dracon stabbed the demonic sword in his hand into the bones under Filey's rib. Bone dragons had no flesh and blood. The sword itself could not cause much damage to Filey. However, after the demonic sword stabbed in, bolts of light purple lightning kept pouring out. In just an instant, the pale purple lightning weaved layers of lightning nets on the skeletal dragon's body. Filey suddenly let out a sorrowful cry. His soul fire shook violently. His body swayed left and right, losing his balance. Warning, your bone dragon has been inflicted with the lightning bind curse of Skallen of the sword. He has temporarily lost part of its ability to move. Filey struggled. His movements became slow and weak. The half-dragon man clutched the demonic sword tightly. The scales on his body became even more azure. To make matters worse, the Borman warrior, who had half of his face torn off, actually got up from the ground. He raised his axe and charged again. This time, his target was the skeletal dragon's tail. Woo. Under the assault of 2 Tier 4 elite warriors, the bone dragon's decline was obvious. At the critical moment, 2 kobold silvermoon zombies pounced over. Bang! Bang! Spell, the last dance. The zombie's self-destruction was more powerful than the skeleton's. Although it could not cause much damage to the Dracon, it cut off the communication between him and the magic sword in time. Matthew was worried, so he used corpse explosion on the zombie's body. The charging wild Borman was also entangled by a zombie. Matthew used a combo of self-destruct and corpse explosion combo. Under the violent explosion, the wild Borman's axe finally cracked. The purple lightning flashed and disappeared. After getting a chance to catch his breath, the skeletal dragon stood up almost immediately. Instead of running away, he turned around and pounced. Boom! The battlefield was filled with dust again. Filey's sudden attack forced the Dracon and the Borman to roll to the side. The former launched another skilled sweep. Even though the 2 Tier 4 powerhouses had also dodged it, a suitable distance appeared between the two sides. Just like that, under cover of the other undead, the bone dragon fought and retreated, finally leaving the attack range of the Drakon and the wild boar man. On the tree crown, Matthew wiped away his cold sweat. Elite Tier 4 was indeed difficult to deal with. Whether it was Anderson or the two foreign warriors in front of him, their resistance, combat power, techniques, and tactics were almost impeccable. He glanced at the eastern part of the battlefield. Over there, Anderson personally led the gnoll to attack. Blake took the initiative to fight him. To Matthew's surprise, Blake, who was only at Tier 3, could actually withstand Anderson's ferocious attack head-on. This meant that Big Beard could be considered to be born with divine strength. Eli and Zeller stood behind him to provide support. Zeller was at least a 4th-tier warlock. In a short period of time, both sides were in a stalemate. As long as the troll and drow warrior don't join the battle, we can still drag this on. Matthew retracted his gaze. He looked warily at the wild boarmen who were charging left and right among the undead. However, in the next second, Matthew suddenly realized that the boarman warrior in his field of vision had disappeared. His gaze suddenly shifted to the Drakon beside him. At this moment, the latter was holding the demonic sword high and silently muttering something, staring at him with burning eyes. A strong sense of danger struck. Matthew transformed into a raven and flew back without hesitation. However, it seemed to be too late. A blue portal appeared above the tree. The wild boarman warrior suddenly appeared. Half of his face had turned into a bloody paste, and his expression became even more ferocious. Ha 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 ha. Good teleportation, Mentis. You are the 17th mage to die under our invincible cooperation. As he spoke, he waved his huge axe and hacked at the raven. In a life and death crisis, the Moonlight Society had given him a +1 attribute to all attributes while he was in the shape-shifting form. It was enough to allow the raven he had transformed into to have extraordinary speed. Whoosh! Matthew just flapped his wings and flew away. The terrifying axe wind brushed past his feathers. The wild boarman let out an A when he missed his attack. However, his reaction was also very fast. He kicked on the branch and threw his axe at the raven. The raven's path was blocked off. Matthew had no choice but to take the challenge head-on. Before the wild boarman could catch him, Matthew took the initiative to undo his shape-shifting form. Bang! The two people's heads collided, and they hugged each other in mid-air. Oh, lovely necromancer, you don't really want to fight me in a melee, do you? The wild boarman laughed wildly. The two of them hugged each other and fell down. As soon as he landed, the wild boarman's rough hands immediately grabbed Matthew's neck. He smiled cruelly and exerted force with both hands. Just as he was about to snap Matthew's neck, he felt the air in his hands. Under the boarman's incredulous gaze, the body part above Matthew's chest had actually turned incorporeal. Who said necromancers can't fight in melee? Matthew stared at him coldly. He shook off the glove on his right hand, and a violent, uncontrollable negative energy surged out. Ha! At that moment, Matthew's right hand also grabbed the thick neck of the wild boar. Hint, you have used undead body to transform part of your body into ghost form. You have used pale hand on the wild boar warrior. Even though he felt the negative energy overflowing from the pale hand, the boarman warrior was not afraid at all. Instant death for spells or skills below legendary tier almost never worked. This was also an important reason why there were very few mid- and low-level necromancers who focused on instant death spells. The wild boarman relied on his strong physique and could easily bypass all of this. So he ignored Matthew's actions and placed his hands on the ground, trying to get up to find his axe. Undead form did not mean that it was immune to all damage. Many enchanted weapons could cause damage to specters, and his axe happened to be one of them. You're dead, necromancer. The wild boar warrior growled and wanted to walk to the side. However, Matthew stuck to him like gangrene. The neck of the boarman warrior was very thick, and the pale hand could only grab a small part of it. Moreover, no matter how hard Matthew tried, he could not leave even a mark on the neck of the wild boarman. Only the terrifying negative energy was continuously being injected into the enemy's body. Every minute and every second, the boarman warrior was triggering the instant death check from pale hand. However, his physique was indeed extremely powerful. Matthew pinched him for a few seconds, but he was still safe and sound. I told you, you're dead. The boarman warrior was extremely rough. He dragged Matthew to the side. If Matthew's body weren't in the undead state, he would have been dragged until his skin and flesh were torn apart. But Matthew was also very persistent. He just hung on to the body of the wild boar warrior. All his strength was channeled into the pale hand. In the chaos, the wild boarman dragged Matthew and rushed 7 to 8 meters away. Just as he was about to grab his axe, a strange shriek suddenly came from the pale hand. Wait! The wild boar warrior seemed to have sensed something and let out a shrill roar. At that moment, the indomitable momentum of the wild boarman suddenly stopped. His eyes were wide open, and his entire body was turning gray at a speed visible to the naked eye. A thick aura of death bloomed from his body. Bang! His sturdy body fell to the ground. His entire face turned into a stiff greenish-gray color, and a large amount of negative energy involuntarily dissipated from it. Matthew lay on his body and panted heavily. He could not help but look at his right hand. Something seemed to have awakened in the pale hand. Hint: due to your increased luck value, the pale hand's instant death has taken effect. You have killed Boarman Warrior Banwen. Pale hand killed and captured a high-quality soul, LV14. Effect increasing. Attack range plus 1 meter. Instant death check effectiveness slightly increased. The effectiveness of Pale Hand could be increased. Matthew, who had survived the disaster, was shocked at first, but then he was attacked by intense pain. The effect of the undead body had ended, and there were still many superficial wounds on his body from being dragged by the wild boarman. If it weren't for the sobriety sticker on his forehead, his will and focus would probably drop drastically at this moment. It hurts. Luckily, I have the undead body and Pale Hand. Matthew barely managed to stand up. He saw Ella and Peggy rushing back to help. At this moment, in the enemy camp ahead, a voice filled with grief and indignation was heard. The Dracon-cursed warrior revealed a sorrowful expression. In the next second, he charged at Matthew like a madman. His speed was so fast that it made one's hair stand on end. After a few moves, he crossed the line of the undead. The guards immediately went up to meet them, but the Dracon's figure suddenly fluctuated violently. His figure disappeared from the spot. A few seconds later, he appeared again near an oak tree in a flash. The Dracon's charge seemed elegant, but it was also unstoppable. When he passed by the oak tree, his body crashed into it and directly broke the 3-meter-tall oak tree. Boom! The oak tree fell to the ground. The Dracon quickly approached Matthew. However, at that moment, he also saw the change in Matthew's expression. Originally, he was still grimacing in fear, but when the Dracon crashed into the oak tree, all the fear on Matthew's face disappeared. In its place, there was only terrifying coldness and intense killing intent. How dare you injure my tree? Matthew was furious. His mind reacted, and then he charged at the Dracon Swordmaster. When the Dracon saw the necromancer coming towards him, he was stunned. Then, he raised the magic sword in his hand in ecstasy. In a flash, a gust of cold wind came from behind him. The Dracon, who had focused all his attention on Matthew because of his partner's tragic death, did not notice that a cunning and huge fellow had already sneaked behind him. Boom! The skeletal dragon's huge claws mercilessly slapped the Dracon's back. The latter staggered. He did not even manage to hold onto the demonic sword properly, and his lower body was firmly pinned to the ground by the dragon. Just as he endured the pain and wanted to reach for his demonic sword, the necromancer had already rushed in front of him. The Dracon struggled violently. However, the other party had already bent down and placed that terrifying hand on his head. Unforgivable. This was the last thing the Dracon heard before he died. Hint: Pale Hand has killed and captured a high-quality soul, level 14. The effect is increasing. Attack range plus 1.5 meters, current attack range is 2.5 meters. Instant death check effectiveness slightly increased. Obtain a small amount of lifesteal effect. After killing the Dracon, Matthew's anger subsided slightly. He quickly put away the magic sword, battle flag, and giant axe, then called 2 zombies to drag the 2 corpses away. The town guards who had returned to the defense team were speechless when they saw this scene. On the battlefield, the Underground Alliance army had lost their incomparably brave duo. The Underground Alliance army was quickly defeated. There was no need for others to take action. The Silvermoon zombies, which occasionally emitted a withering light, easily drove the kobolds and gnolls away. But Matthew did not slack off. He tidied himself up and climbed onto the skeletal dragon's back, finding a comfortable position to stand. Let's go. Under Matthew's orders, Filey aggressively charged into the battlefield. Wherever the dragons might reach, the underground creatures scattered and fled. However, most of them were mercilessly killed by the bone dragon. If there were any that slipped through the onslaught, they died at Matthew's hands. He simply stood on the back of the bone dragon and stretched out his right hand. A steady stream of death notifications came from Matthew's system. Just like that. The man and the dragon were like harvesters on the battlefield. A large number of underground creatures died. The battle gradually died down. On the eastern front. Sinwalk, Lara, what the hell are you doing? Anderson, who was being held down by Blake and the others, almost collapsed when he turned around and saw the situation on the battlefield. He angrily hammered Blake away with his mace and let out a raving roar. However, what made his blood pressure explode was the troll Sinwalk was still sleeping soundly at the entrance of the cave. And the drow warrior Lara was already missing. Damn it. Damn it. You're all trash. Anderson waved his mace crazily. Blake and the others were shocked by his madness and moved away. Even the gnoll behind Anderson did not dare to approach their leader, who had completely gone berserk. At this moment, a shadow the size of a small mountain rushed over from the battlefield. Filey carried Matthew and broke through the formation of the underground creatures. Then, it charged towards Anderson without stopping. Dragon's Might. As soon as he got close, Filey tactfully took the initiative to release his Dragon's Might. Anderson's resistance was very strong. However, in the face of the targeted Dragon's Might, he still couldn't be completely immune to it. At the crucial moment, Zeller also sent an assist. He cast a powerful paralysis spell from afar. Anderson's muscles began to tremble. Seizing this opportunity, Filey directly pressed its huge body onto it. Rumble. The skeletal dragon's body crushed the gnoll evil art master's body like a mountain. Anderson's head was still stuck out from the mountain of bones. Matthew strode over. He activated Pale Hand from 2 meters away. A grayish-brown hand of negative energy extended from Matthew's right hand and pressed down on Anderson's head. Under the thick aura of death, he instinctively trembled. Then, he burst into uncontrollable laughter. I am immortal. Hearing this, Matthew was unmoved. He asked with a playful expression, is that so? As soon as he finished speaking, under Anderson's terrified gaze, a faint white light appeared in the eastern sky. No, this is impossible. Anderson struggled violently, but the skeletal dragon's weight was heavy. No matter how hard he tried, he could not move. No one knows the sunrise time in Rolling Stone Town better than me. You're too late. Matthew smiled. At the end of the day, midnight will pass. As he spoke, he lowered his right hand. It completely pressed down on Anderson's head. Anderson screamed. The scream lasted for about 10 seconds. Anderson's face was filled with despair and fear, but it gradually turned into bewilderment. The smile on Matthew's face was slightly stiff. I am immune to instant death. Anderson was ecstatic. At this moment, Zeller's paralysis effect was about to wear off. The gnoll evil art master once again displayed his almost abnormal physique. Boom. Anderson actually stood up while carrying the bone dragon. I am immune. Anderson turned his head abruptly, trying to break free from the restraints of the pale hand. He instantly made preparations to retreat. At the critical moment, the pale hand twitched violently again. In the blink of an eye, it had drained Anderson's exuberant vitality. Anderson, who had just had a glimmer of hope, knelt down with his eyes wide open. They were lifeless. At the same time, the morning light in the east finally broke through the darkness and pierced the human world. A loud and clear cry came from that direction. Everyone could vaguely see it. A giant eagle seemed to be flying towards them from the sun. There was a bald figure sitting on its back. A few kilometers away from the battlefield, a team of well-trained cavalrymen was passing through the oak forest at high speed. The person at the front was the Lord, who was filled with fighting intent. Our companions are ahead, our families are being threatened by evil creatures, and our territory is being trampled by the enemy. The Suki family would never give up on any of their citizens or let go of any of their enemies. We've been at peace for too long. Perhaps we've already forgotten what kind of excellent warriors we are. It doesn't matter because we're going to start a massacre tonight. We need to let the outside world know what will happen to those reckless underground creatures if they provoke the enemy they shouldn't. On this land, we are the people they can't afford to offend. Now, the enemy is right in front of us. Everyone, please follow me. Accompanied by Rieger's extremely provocative, angry roars, the knights rushed out of the oak forest with high morale. Kill them. Rieger rushed to the front with red eyes. But in the next second, his movement suddenly slowed down. Because the battlefield in front of him was not how he had imagined it at all. There was not a strong enemy army. He only saw undead creatures scattered across the vast wasteland. At the forefront of the undead, a tall and thin figure was riding on a bone dragon, chasing after the remaining underground creatures and killing them. "You're late, Rugger." "Of course, so am I." A voice full of energy sounded in Rugger's ears. Upon hearing this voice, a smile appeared on Rugger's face. He turned around and hugged the newcomer. Due to his heavy armor, he could only symbolically hug the other party's waist. "Welcome back, Weekly." Rugger patted his back sincerely. Then, he couldn't help but touch the other party's smooth forehead. "The feeling is still the same as before, huh? If you dare to lay your hands on an evil monk who worships evil Queen Babasha or Dusk Creator Galen, I can guarantee that your brains will be blown out." The warrior monk who came with the Eastern Eagle showed a helpless smile. "But you touched the head of Lee Wiki, so he can only roll his eyes at you." "It's good to see you." Rieger looked at Lee Wiki with a sigh. "You haven't changed much from 10 years ago. Is this the help of Chi?" Lee Wiki smiled and said, "Chi may be able to slow down aging, but following the precepts is the secret to eternal youth." As he spoke, his gaze turned to the battlefield in the distance. "To be honest, I couldn't believe that there would be a necromancer in your army." Rieger's face darkened. "This is an accident. He's not my subordinate. To some extent, he made my pre-war declaration a joke. Necromancers being annoying are not without reason." Lee Wiki asked curiously, "You can't say that. If you had such a necromancer with you when you were exploring the purgatory, you would have suffered much less damage." Rieger was silent for a moment, and then he snorted. "That's why it's even more annoying, isn't it? Let's not talk about this. When you went to the east to search for the legendary path, how was your harvest?" Lee Wiki said calmly. "I once climbed a lonely peak that was as tall as the 10 million meters and played with giant turtles and whales at the bottom of the sea, but I never found the trace I wanted. However, I've gained quite a lot along the way. Perhaps my strength hasn't increased, but my soul has been greatly satisfied." Rieger revealed a gloating smile. "So your strength is still at the 4th tier like mine?" Lee Wiki glanced at him. "Pretty much. It's only 4 levels higher than tier 4. This time, it was Rieger's turn to roll his eyes. "Hey, how could you two forget the real hero?" The Eastern Giant Eagle transformed into a human and interrupted unhappily. "To be honest, Wowen, your flying speed might not be comparable to my divine steps." Lee Wiki said seriously, "If you let me come back alone, I might have arrived sooner." The druid Hoven immediately became anxious. "Do you think divine steps can allow you to run 3,000 miles? I let you ride me for a day and a night, and this is how you treat me." Lee Wiki, there must be something wrong with your training and commandments. Lee Wiki joked, "There is no such thing as taking care of a small animal's self-esteem in my commandments." Wowen immediately turned into a sparrow and pecked at his head. However, Lee Wiki's bald head was undamaged. The sparrow pecked for a long time and almost pecked its mouth sore. Rieger snickered at the side. It wasn't until Zeller walked over that the fight that didn't match their age came to an end. "Pay attention to your status and image. You are no longer the youths from 20 to 30 years ago." Zeller smiled and hugged Lee Wiki. The latter immediately said emotionally, "Oh Zeller, you are still so handsome and charming. Resisting your charm is probably the hardest commandment of mine to keep. Lee, your flattery is still so lame, stiff, and even a little disgusting. Leonard Guseems all over Misrace. Wowen is right. I have never seen a monk who loves to talk more than you." Lee Wiki spread his hands. "Is there a possibility that you have seen too few monks?" Wowen stepped on Lee Wiki's head and flapped his wings. "It's rare for everyone to gather together. We must have a good drink. Lee Wiki is treating." Lee Wiki took out his empty pocket. "My commandments forbid me from drinking, and my commandments have made me poor." Rieger shook his head. "What a pity. It seems that only the 3 of us can drink." Lee Wiki blinked. "For this occasion, I could break my commandments." The 4 of them pushed and laughed for a while. Meeting again after so many years. They were clearly old people from a turbid world. However, in front of the comrades who had fought side by side in the past, everyone saw the shadows of each other when they were young. It was as if they had returned to their high-spirited teenage years. No worries, no reservations, no burdens. There was only the hope that tomorrow would be better. On the battlefield, Matthew rode on the bone dragon and waved his pale hand wantonly. This thing could increase its effect by killing people. It was just that killing low-level enemies would only increase his strength slightly. Even so. Now, the attack range of the pale hand had reached 5.6 meters. This meant that Matthew could ride on the back of the bone dragon and sweep the enemies below easily, like cleaning up the minions. Matthew did not forget to keep his eyes and ears open. The arrival of the Eastern Eagle and the monk, as well as the reinforcements from Rieger, did not escape his attention. However, what happened next left Matthew confused. He had thought that these people would come over to help. But they were catching up outside the forest. Matthew could even hear their laughter. Are they embarrassed to steal my kills? Or do they think there's no need to make a move? Matthew pondered for a moment. But at this moment, he suddenly found a dense group of shadows at the entrance of the mine. Are there more underground creatures? Matthew's heart skipped a beat. He might be riding Filey, but in fact, he was already at the end of his rope. If there were another wave of enemies, he would immediately turn around and hand the situation over to Rieger. However, this time, the underground creatures that appeared at the entrance of the mine seemed to be afraid. They wandered around the area for a while. Pairs of red eyes were fixed on Matthew and the skeletal dragon. Both sides had a faint intention of confrontation. At this moment, a clear dragon's roar suddenly came from behind Matthew. Whoosh! A wave of air brushed past the edge of the bone dragon. The dragon's roar rushed to the entrance of the mine along with the air. The underground creatures were all knocked down to the floor. Very quickly, the new wave of underground creatures began to retreat. Their figures quickly disappeared into the cave. Matthew heaved a sigh of relief. His gaze couldn't help but glance at the data panel. Hint: you have encountered Monk, Divine Dragon Sex Disciple, Liwiki, level 20. Liwiki used the Dragon Warrior Wave to force back the new underground coalition army. The mine leads to the underground area named Underdark. It seems that they've are acting that again. A deep voice sounded behind Matthew. The bald warrior monk was flying over. His steps were strange and did not seem fast, but in the blink of an eye, he had already arrived near Matthew. Behind him, Rieger and the others were also approaching quickly. Matthew got off the bone dragon and went up to him. Hello, you can call me Liwiki. The other party took the initiative to extend his right hand to Matthew as a symbol of friendship. Young necromancer, I feel in you the love for nature. You are the most peculiar necromancer I have ever seen, the inheritor of the path of necromancy. Matthew subconsciously reached over. You can call me Matthew. Unexpectedly, Liwiki shrank back. I heard that necromancers are very friendly, but there's no need to greet others with instant death spells. Matthew smiled apologetically and switched to his left hand. Liwiki smiled and held his hand, then patted his shoulder in a friendly manner. I'm just kidding. I've already cultivated the diamond body and am immune to all instant death spells. At this moment, Rieger and Zeller also walked over. After a brief introduction, the two of them exchanged glances. Matthew found out that other than the half-legend, Liwiki, the druid Wowen who could transform into the Great Eagle of the East, was also the son of a demigod. However, due to some special circumstances, the current Wowen could no longer participate in the battle. The enemy has not been completely eliminated. They were only scared away by me. Liwiki looked at the entrance of the cave and said, I can feel the evil approaching. Perhaps some force in the abyss is stirring. Rieger and the others revealed a solemn expression. Just as everyone was thinking. But Liwiki had already strode into the cave. I'll give them a small warning. As he spoke, his figure disappeared into the cave. He went in alone. Doesn't he need help? Matthew could not help but ask. He always likes to act alone. Zeller explained, don't worry, Lee will be fine. He's the most special monk, but very strong. Rieger, who was standing at the side, looked at Matthew with a complicated expression. You surprised me. I didn't expect you to be able to kill the enemy alone and save our people from losses. I'm very grateful to you. So, is there anything you need help with? Matthew thought for a moment. Clean up the battlefield and move the corpses. Rieger's face sank, but he still agreed. Oh, right, I also want to build a cemetery under the forest. You know, I have a lot of undead creatures under me now. Matthew scratched his head in embarrassment. Rieger's face turned completely black. He replied unhappily, that is your private land. You don't have to tell me what you want to do. Matthew was even more embarrassed. What I mean is that I don't have that much money and manpower. Rieger looked at Matthew in disbelief. Zeller reminded the two of them at the right time. Matthew guarded Rolling Stone Town alone. Rieger turned around and walked away at a clear path. How much money and manpower do you need? You can discuss it with Zeller. Matthew stopped Rieger in time. Wait, there's one more thing. He pointed at the source of the snoring and reminded him, there's another troll there. He's an important member of the Order of Calamity. I don't know what to do with him. The group walked around the troll. I think I have a way to wake him up. Guo Wen, who had returned to his human form, took out a pitch-black medicine bottle from somewhere. He pulled out the cork. An extremely smelly gas gushed out. The rest of them took a few steps back. Even the sleeping troll was sneezing from the smell. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and straightened half of his body. Everyone immediately took out their weapons, their faces full of vigilance. What happened? The troll looked at everyone in confusion. Your army has been defeated like a mountain. Rieger shouted, your companions have already been killed by us. However, the troll's face was filled with joy. So, am I captured? Rieger was stunned for a moment, then said with certainty. Exactly. Bang. The troll suddenly lay on the ground. That's great. Sinwok has been captured, and Sinwok can have a good sleep. A few seconds later. Under everyone's shocked and complicated gazes, the thunderous snoring sounded again. Everyone looked at each other. Rieger was about to draw his sword, but he put it back halfway. He looked at Matthew. It's up to you to decide how to deal with it. Everything on this battlefield is your spoils of war, including the captives. You should have the right to deal with them. This sentence was equivalent to the official deciding the distribution of tonight's results. Matthew was not surprised. Putting aside the fact that he hated necromancers and female slaves, Rieger was indeed an upright and fair lord. However, Matthew had not thought of how to deal with this big-hearted troll. He circled Sinwok 3 times. The latter snored like thunder and had no sense of crisis. I can kill him for you, Rieger suggested. Matthew shook his head. I think a living troll might be more valuable. I want to train him. Rieger shrugged. Then you'd better watch him until he dies. He might be sleeping soundly now, but when he wakes up, especially when he's hungry, he'll be a very troublesome threat. Matthew agreed with Rieger. Trolls were indeed dangerous and evil creatures. Perhaps it was easier to control them as undead creatures, but he felt that the troll in front of him was not that bad. He was just a little too fat. Can you do me a favor? Matthew looked at Zeller with a questioning gaze. I plan to build a prison for the troll, but before that, I can't control him. Zeller nodded and replied, this is not difficult. As he spoke, he took out his wand from his waist and aimed it at the sleeping troll. Crackle. Crackle. After a short incantation, a bolt of lightning shot out from the tip of the wand and struck the troll's head. However, the latter had no reaction. Zeller wasn't discouraged. He repeated the incantation 3 times. When the 4th bolt of lightning struck Sinwok, the troll suddenly woke up and shouted, who's touching Sinwok's butt? As soon as he finished speaking, his huge body shrank rapidly. Soon, it turned into a lively frog. Here. Zeller skillfully grabbed the frog, stuffed it into a glass bottle, and gave it to Matthew. My malicious transfiguration can last for 24 days, but during this period, this glass bottle cannot be broken, and he cannot come into contact with any living thing. Matthew nodded as he carefully took the bottle. What do you plan to do with him? Zeller asked curiously. Matthew thought for a moment. I haven't thought about it yet. Perhaps we can use him to build the cemetery. After dealing with the threat of the troll, the only thing left in the north of the oak forest was to clean up the battlefield. Rieger ordered his men to set up a monitoring station near the mine entrance. He planned to explore the underground space of the Gold Digger Basin in the next few days to prevent underground creatures from infiltrating Rolling Stone Town from other exits. These jobs had nothing to do with Matthew. At this moment, he was commanding the skeletons, zombies, and living people to move the corpses and count the spoils of war. Rieger had already given the order. Matthew planned to leave a portion of the spoils of war for the people who participated in the battle, including Zeller, Blake, and Eli. The rest would be his. He did a rough count. First of all, the income in cash exceeded 1,500 gold coins. This was based on the fact that most of the kobolds and Knoll were poor. The Order of Calamity wasn't rich, either. The main reason was that Matthew had killed too many people this time. Next was equipment and weapons. Matthew had gotten a lot of good stuff from the 3 Tier 4 threats. Rooster War Flag, this item can increase the morale of the group and the vision and strength of the flag bearer. At the same time, it can activate a small area healing halo. Growler, it's that 2-handed axe. It has the effects of unstoppable force, wound tear and spirit slaying weapon. It's a melee weapon and can be sold for a good price in Jade Court or Bayan City. There was also a small piece of adamantine on the axe. It was not impossible to remove it if it was melted. After all, adamantine and mithril were rare metals that spellcasters were very eager for. Rhinoceros leather shorts. It was also taken from the body of the Boorman. This pair of pants is light and tough and can provide far more armor value than ordinary leather armor. The only flaw is that the size is a little big. One side of the shorts can fit 2 Matthews. Demon Sword Skalana and Cursed Warrior's Teachings, a good magic sword and a small booklet found on the body of the Drakon. The latter also recorded the inheritance method of the Cursed Warrior. However, one needed to go to the underground to complete the inheritance quest. Aside from the Cursed Warrior class, it seemed that only people with psychic abilities could use the Demon Sword. Ring of Desire. It was taken from the body of the Drakon. Its name is desire, but its actual effect is abstinence. The wearer will gradually lose the urge to reproduce. In addition, it provides 10 dark vision. Matthew tried it, and the effect was not bad. It meant that there was no need for lighting in a completely dark environment. Cursed Hammer, the main weapon of the Noel Anderson. It is of excellent quality, but the negative effect is that the wielder loses 2 points of agility and gains points of strength. It is also a rare item for some melee classes. Scroll of the Void was a sealed magic book that could only be opened by the members of the Order of Calamity with a unique spell. Anti-Magic Stone, Magic Contract. This stone can be used to cast the instant magic counter once a day. This seemingly ordinary stone is actually a magic contract between the Warlock and the Master, symbolizing the cooperation between the two. Matthew had to muster up a lot of courage to take this stone. Regardless of whether it was the great evil demon Trier or the Midnight God, he had already offended them, so he didn't care if he offended them to the end. The only concern was whether the other party would be able to locate him through this stone. However, on second thought, the location of the oak forest had long been exposed. He would be guarding this place for the time being, so the location was not important. If the Order of Calamity still refused to give up, then let them come. Finally, the most valuable spoils of war for Matthew were the corpses of more than 300 Gnoll and kobolds, as well as the corpses of 3 Tier 4 adventurers. Even 300 cannon fodder corpses were enough to create a negative energy pool of rebirth in the cemetery. This directly changed the ecology of the cemetery. Matthew decided that after the number of skeletons reached the limit, the remaining corpses would be used as materials to fill the pool of rebirth. High-level corpses were even more useful. It could be buried in exchange for a gift of nature, or it could be used to create Dark Warriors or Death Knights. It's a pity that the Dark Warrior can only be made at the 4th tier. I've mastered the Undying Domain in advance, so I should be able to try it at the 3rd tier. Matthew knew that his advancement was imminent. Fortunately, the double harvest effect was about to end. Now, he finally had time to arrange matters related to the advancement. As for which of the 3 corpses would be used as a gift and which would be used to make Dark Warriors, Matthew was still unsure. He planned to properly store them. He would make a choice when the time was right. However, just as Matthew was dealing with the body, he was surprised to find that evil Art Master Anderson's head had disappeared. He squatted down and carefully examined the wound on the corpse. He found that the wound on the head was smooth. The technique of the head cutter was definitely perfect. The first thing that popped up in Matthew's mind was the appearance of the Drow warrior, who had disappeared. Did she steal Anderson's head? It can't be that this fellow can be resurrected, right? Matthew frowned. He was not afraid of Anderson's comeback, but he was afraid of the Drow warrior's ability to appear and disappear. Anderson's corpse was surrounded by the garrison and a few circles of zombies. Since the other party could steal Anderson's head without him knowing, it meant that she could launch a similar sneak attack. Matthew immediately ordered the Bone Dragon to activate blind detection. Unfortunately, Filey had walked around the entire place but found nothing. It seems that while I was cleaning up the mess, she stole Anderson's head and immediately ran away. Matthew felt a little regretful. Anderson's corpse was originally the best material to make a Dark Knight. If it became a headless horseman, he would have to find him a mount. Forget it. It's too troublesome. Let's just bury it. Matthew picked up the shovel skillfully. He buried the Gnoll's body under an oak tree. A Gnoll was buried in spring. What would nature give him? Matthew was looking forward to it. After dealing with all kinds of spoils of war, Matthew finally had the time to cast his gaze into the data panel. Hint: you have successfully completed a small-scale battle and returned with a great victory. You have obtained the elements of the battle domain I: strategy, hand-to-hand combat, probing, and counterattacking. Accumulate more elements, and you will have the opportunity to enter the battle domain. After tonight, the terrifying pale hand would spread widely in the form of rumors. Your regional legend, Rolling Stone Town /Underdark +1. Your faction legend, Order of Wither Order of Calamity +L. The accumulation of elements and legendary points meant that Matthew had taken another steady step on the path of legendary. However, his gains tonight were not limited to this. Maintenance is also very important. Follow on Mission 2 tonight. Vaughn have successfully stopped the invasion of the Order of Calamity and the Underdark Coalition against the Oak Forest. You have received the reward Shapeshifting Transformation Eel. Wilderness Transformation Eel, you can choose a new animal as your new shapeshifting form. Nightblade Lynx. Albatross. Brown Bear, Moonlight Enhancement. Looking at the 3 new forms, Matthew fell into deep thought. His gaze was mainly on the Nightblade Lynx and the Brown Bear. The albatross was not bad, but Matthew already had a raven, so it was naturally the first to be excluded. Between the remaining 2. If the Moonlight Society's exclusive enhancement description was not behind the Brown Bear, the Nightblade Lynx was undoubtedly a more tempting choice. Not only were these creatures agile and natural predators, they also had the ability to sneak and cast spells. Running fast had always been an attribute that Matthew paid more attention to. It was a pity. We can't just ignore the goddess of moonlight. Matthew hesitated for a while and finally chose the brown bear. Hint, you have obtained the wild brown bear form, Moonlight Enhancement. Your wild form has received the blessing of the goddess of moonlight, Osea. The brown bear has been renamed as Moon Bear. Compared to ordinary brown bears, moon bears have the following additional advantages. Moon Bear's strength and constitution +1. Bathed in the moonlight, the moon bear's running speed was twice as fast as usual. The moon bear had gained instinct casting, fine spell. Moon bears are very attractive, so it is easier for them to attract the opposite sex. The moon bear gained the abilities of suppression, intimidation, and capture. The Moonlight Society is stronger than I thought. Matthew was glad that he had made the right choice again. Not only were the moon bears powerful, but they could also run fast under the moonlight. Their looks were not good, but their instinct casting was amazing. The so-called instinct casting referred to some wild beasts and monsters who had not experienced spellcasting training. They relied on bloodline awakening or a chance to obtain a specific spellcasting ability. It was similar to an animal version of a warlock. The difference was that instinct casting did not consume mana, and there was almost no casting throw. The casting method was also very close to instantaneous and silent casting. Therefore, the instinct casting was perfect for ambushes. Just by looking at the text description, Matthew could imagine a set of fine spell to trap the enemy and suppress them. The moon bear's basic attributes were extraordinary. He finally had the ability to fight in close combat. The only pity was that the pale hand could not be used in the wilderness form. Otherwise, the enemy would be able to taste the negative energy bear paw. Until dawn. Only then did the people in the north of the oak forest gradually become sparse. Since Matthew did not allow logging in the oak forest, Rieger had to go to the logging yard in the farm area to gather wood. However, he was efficient. At dawn, the sentry post at the monitoring station had already taken shape. Matthew commanded the zombies to hide the corpses in a huge underground cave. He planned to use the negative energy stone to build a sealing array to store the corpses. This was obviously not a small project. Fortunately, zombies were much more capable than skeletons. At least Matthew's blood pressure didn't increase when he was ordering them. Later, Matthew saw a young man in a black jailer's uniform running hurriedly from the town. He looked a little anxious. Did something happen again? Matthew quietly went over. My lord. Not good. As expected, the young man reported with a bitter expression. Last night, the 3 prisoners of the Sci-fi Frost Brotherhood secretly dug a tunnel and escaped. Hearing this, Matthew, Zeller, and Rieger had serious expressions. The Sci-fi Frost Brotherhood was full of ruthless arsonists. After they escaped from prison, they would definitely do something bad. Was there a fire in the town last night? Rieger asked seriously. The young man thought for a moment. I don't think so. At least I didn't hear of any fire on my way here. The 3 of them heaved a sigh of relief. Rieger wanted to ask again. Unexpectedly, another person in the garrison uniform ran over from the direction of the town. The man panted and said, reporting to my lord. We found a group of people in the drainage ditch in the craftsman area. Their hands were tied with a rope. They clearly had room to move, but they didn't dare to move. Later, after the vice captain's verification, he found out that a few of them were villains who were wanted by several nearby cities. They seemed to be members of the Sci-Leveler Frost Brotherhood. The young man from before widened his eyes in disbelief. He couldn't help but ask, "Is there a total of 3 people?" Later, that person shook his head and said, "Not only that, there are a total of 9 of them, and one of them is even crippled." He then asked Rieger, "My lord, what should we do now? Should we lock them all up in prison?" When the 3 of them heard the report, they all had strange expressions. "I'll handle it." Zeller whistled, and the horse that was resting at the side heard him. He mounted the horse and headed in the direction of the town. There were indeed a few members of the Sci-Leveler Frost Brotherhood in the group of the Order of Calamity yesterday. Matthew speculated, they should have gone to prison, but why were they tied up after they successfully escaped? Rieger did not take it to heart. He glanced at Matthew and said meaningfully, "This is what happens when you offend someone you shouldn't. Coincidentally, there are quite a few people in Rolling Stone Town that you shouldn't offend." The image of the elegant gentleman Richard immediately appeared in Matthew's mind. "So, how do you plan to deal with them? We can't keep locking them up forever." Matthew looked curiously at Rieger. Rieger waved his hand and walked away as if he was unwilling to talk to Matthew. However, his voice still floated over. "Of course, it's to collect the bounty. I've already sent someone to inform Jade Court that their Shadow Leopard is on the way. Sometimes, clearing bounties can be a good business. Cleaning up the battlefield and storing the corpses was a big project. Even with the help of the zombies and the garrison, it took Matthew 3 days to temporarily arrange these precious spoils of war. During this time, the state of double harvest had entered its final countdown. Matthew's planting of trees naturally began to accelerate. 4 days later. Hint, your temporary state of double harvest has ended. During this period, you have planted 452 trees in total. Your nature affinity has been greatly improved. Remaining number of strengthening, 7. After the 4-hour deadline of the banishment letter, Matthew summoned Soldier back. With this 4th-tier sword dancer by his side, his sense of security doubled. Right now, he was going to strengthen Soldier for the last time. To what extent could it reach? It all depended on Soldier's luck and Matthew's. Unfortunately, the luck that Lulu gave me has disappeared. Moreover, after that blessing, she seemed to have suffered a great loss. I haven't seen her for the past few days." Matthew took a deep breath and began to strengthen without saying anything. The result was unsettling. First, he leveled up to level 15. Following that, the keywords were also released one after another. Train Clansman, Purple, your summoned soldier has mastered the skill of training his own kind. The skeleton soldiers trained by Soldier will have a certain chance to obtain the assassin profession and a very low chance to obtain the blade dancer profession. After long-term training, the overall strength of the skeleton soldiers will be significantly improved. Bad direction, Gray. In non-combat mode, there is a certain probability that Soldier will get lost. Training his own kind is still okay. I now have 120 skeleton soldiers for him to train. Maybe he can create a skeleton assassin team. Matthew's eyes lit up. As for his poor sense of direction, in his opinion, Soldier's intelligence was not enough to support him to move alone. As long as he kept following him, he would not get lost, right? Matthew was quite satisfied with the first 3 keywords. However, the next 3 keywords gave him a head-on blow. Dual blade attack, Blue, your summoned creature will gain additional proficiency points when using dual blades. Beginner horsemanship, White, your summoned creature has mastered horsemanship. There is a certain chance for it to become a cavalryman with a mount. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, Gray, in a non-combat state, Soldier will show slight obsessive-compulsive disorder tendencies. Blue, White and Gray. Was this better? Matthew glanced at it one last time, disheartened. However, this time, what appeared in front of his eyes was a flash of golden light. Domain, Shadow, your summoned creature has obtained the qualifications to enter the Shadow domain. It has obtained the following abilities. Shadow Slingshot, Soldier can use the energy slingshot to move quickly in the Shadow realm. Shadow Kill, Soldier can hide in any shadow and launch a surprise attack on the enemy. Power of Domain, Soldier can activate the Shadow domain, which will shock and repel the enemy. It was actually a domain. Matthew stared at Soldier for more than 10 seconds. However, this guy was so confused that he thought Matthew wanted to see him dance. Without saying a word, he twisted his hips with all his might. "Can you share your domain with me?" Matthew asked. Soldier was stunned. Matthew patiently communicated for a long time, but Soldier still looked confused. Matthew didn't know if he was pretending or if he really couldn't share. In the end, the friendly exchange between the master and servant ended with Matthew giving up. At this point, Soldier's strength had been determined. Level 15, wielding the power of the shadow domain, wielding extremely strong assassination abilities, and being able to train his own kind. This meant that Soldier had the template to become a lord or a hero. He was already able to contend with Filey. The only flaw was that there were a series of gray keywords. But overall, Matthew was still satisfied and gratified. At least there weren't any raise salary keywords, right? At night, it was beyond Matthew's expectations. This time, the latter was here to ask for his leave. After this battle, I deeply realized my own shortcomings. Perhaps I shouldn't wait for the change of seasons. Now, I'm going to kill that ice dragon. Eli said solemnly, I apologize for my recklessness at the beginning. I almost missed out on a true friend of nature because of my prejudice. That night, I witnessed your reaction when the dracon into a tree. At that moment, I saw endless anger in your eyes. Only those who truly place nature at the top would have such a reaction. Matthew, my friend, you are the true guardian of the oak forest. I couldn't help you this time. When I become a tier 4 shapeshifter, I'll come back and fulfill my promise. Seeing his determination, Matthew didn't ask him to stay. He only said some words of blessing and planned to get him more food. Who knew that at this moment? Eli suddenly looked shy. He whispered in embarrassment, before I leave, I have a request. Matthew nodded and said, please speak. Eli asked expectantly, can I see Peggy? I want to personally praise and thank her for her cooking. Oh. I guess she must be a very beautiful woman, right? Matthew tried to be as tactful as possible as he looked at Eli's eager gaze. Peggy is indeed a woman with a pure heart, but sometimes, keeping a trace of mystery may be a better way to get along. Eli understood Matthew's meaning. He was a little dissatisfied. I thought that after these days together, even if you and I are not friends, at least not strangers. Matthew hurriedly smiled and said, as long as you agree, Eli, we will be friends forever. Eli's expression softened. Since we're friends, why did you stop me from seeing Peggy? As he spoke, he suddenly revealed an expression of realization. Could it be that Peggy is your lover? Then I'm indeed a little rude, but don't worry. I just want to see her. I definitely have no intention of snatching her away. After all, I've been there before. I know how painful that feeling is. I won't let you suffer that kind of pain. The smile on Matthew's face froze. No, Peggy is not my lover, and I'm not stopping you from seeing her out of selfish desires. Eli was surprised. Then why are you so unwilling to let me see Peggy? Matthew was about to explain when a tall figure suddenly walked over in a hurry. Matthew. Hurry up and look at my chest. Come, touch. Did I lose some bones? The torn skeleton walked over casually. Taking advantage of the situation, he forcefully pushed Eli to the side. Eli looked displeased, but before he could say anything, the strange skeleton shouted at him, little kitty, don't look so unhappy. I heard you secretly talking about me behind my back. Eli was amused. He was just about to say that he was talking about Miss Peggy. But in the next second, he heard Matthew's helpless voice. All right, Peggy, stop fooling around. Didn't I check for you the other day? It's just a few broken ribs, but I've already helped you reattach them. With your physique, you'll be able to recover in a while. Peggy obviously didn't believe it. She covered her chest with one hand and reached under her ribs with the other. After a while, she shook her head and said, all right, even if the ribs have been reattached, I still feel my butt hurting. Hurry up and help me check it. As soon as he finished speaking, the dumbfounded Eli finally reacted. He asked, tongue-tied, she's Peggy? The torn skeleton said proudly, I am Peggy. Matthew had a hint of pity on his face. Yes. Meet Peggy. Underdark, Bloodlight Pool. The location of the Order of Calamity Sanctuary. In front of the door of an ordinary white house, there was a burning brazier on both sides of the house. The brazier was burning without any substance, and occasionally, a painful and twisted face would flash in the fire. On the steps, a golden-haired man with a genial smile was facing the drow warrior with a vigilant face. He gently opened his arms to the drow warrior, and there was a power in his voice that could move people's hearts. Welcome back to the Holy Church, my daughter Lara. As he spoke, he leaned his arms forward, signaling Lara to come over and hug him. Lara's eyelids twitched slightly. She reluctantly walked over and hugged the man gently before separating. Her body movements were full of resistance, and there was even a deep fear in the depths of her pupils. Father, this operation has failed. Mantis and Banwen have died in the enemy's hands, and Sinwok is suspected to have been captured. I followed Father's orders and only brought back Anderson's head. As she spoke, she held her head tightly in her arms and respectfully handed it over. Only the head. Lara's body trembled. She hurriedly lowered her head and said, "That group of people is keeping a close eye on them. The strength of Rolling Stone Town is above our estimation. That necromancer is very cunning." Anderson was unable to counter his spells, nor did he have the chance to banish his bone dragon. They have a lot of people, and they're guarding the place closely. I can't bring back Anderson's corpse, so I can only settle for the next best option. I'm sorry, this defeat is unavoidable. Even if I were to intervene, I wouldn't be able to change the situation. The golden-haired man shook his head. We did not fail. Lara looked up in surprise and saw a sincere smile on his face. My lord said that he was very happy and that his initial goal had been achieved. Lara was confused. But we were indeed defeated. The golden-haired man smiled and said, "A temporary victory or defeat is just fleeting. More importantly, war is only a means, not an end. We have to hurry up and prepare for the next mission. This is the best way to repay our Lord's generous grace." Lara heaved a sigh of relief and quickly said obediently, "I see. I'll go to the Black Dragon City to persuade them." No rush. The golden-haired man smiled. Everyone is dead, and you are the only one left alive. Although this is my order to you, you still have to be punished. Not for me, but for your dead companions. Lara suddenly raised her head, her eyes filled with fear and unwillingness. Pearl-like beads of sweat instantly appeared on her forehead. "Father." She moaned softly. "What, are you unwilling?" The golden-haired man was still smiling. Under the light of the fire, his shadow was stretched infinitely, forming a ferocious and terrifying outline on the stone wall. "No, I'm willing." Lara gritted her teeth for a long time and finally said, "Come, let's go in." The blonde man gently held her hand. The two of them walked into the wooden house that was painted white. Very quickly, an extremely shrill female voice came from the house. Vaguely, one could even hear the blonde man's gentle teachings. "You should be happy, Lara. It's a father's love. You should be happy. The present is a gift from our Lord. Laugh. Laugh loudly. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I can stuff this spine into your body in time." Very quickly, outside the wooden house, the mournful voice turned into a faint laughter. An underground squirrel passed by in a daze. It curiously leaned on the window of the wooden house and looked around. There was a crisp sound. A ferocious tentacle extended from an unknown place. When the sticky tentacle disappeared, there was only a shallow blood stain on the window. The hysterical laughter in the room. It continued. Northeast of the oak forest, Matthew stood near a marker stone with a serious expression. Behind him were a few guards with shocked expressions. The group was actually still some distance away from the marker stone, but they did not dare to approach it anymore. This was because they felt a terrifying destructive power. The scar of the dead has spread, and it's spreading abnormally. It's stronger than before. Matthew's eyes were solemn. At the time of the incident, he was building a temporary cemetery in the cave with a few teammates. Suddenly he sensed an evil movement. When he followed his senses to this place, he discovered that the scar of the dead had not only spread to the southwest, but the activity of a certain existence within it had also increased significantly. The oak tree that Matthew had planted here was originally 30 to 40 meters away from the scar of the dead. But now, the tree was almost stuck to the scorched earth of the scar of the dead. Under the influence of destructive power, the oak tree was already showing signs of decay. Although it would not die immediately, it would definitely be difficult for it to survive over time. What the hell? Why did the scar of the dead spread out of nowhere? Matthew's mind was full of doubts. Then he remembered a strange thing that he had encountered while cleaning up the corpses over the past few days. Matthew realized that the more than 300 corpses, whether they were gnoll, kobolds, imps, all looked more like dried corpses. There was no water and no blood. When Matthew first discovered the anomaly, he thought it had something to do with the evil spells the Order of Calamity had cast on the underground creatures. But now it seems that it might not be the case. Could it be that the scar of the dead has absorbed the blood of those who died in the war? Oh, right, I used elementary spirit vision to check the condition of the spirit bodies and found that the number of spirit bodies after the battle was also on the low side. I thought that my spirit vision had weakened. Matthew's heart was pounding. Was the destruction of Rolling Stone Town not the ultimate goal of the Order of Calamity? The scar of the dead was. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At the edge of the scorched earth, a giant hand that seemed to be made of countless pieces of paper and ashes broke out of the ground and attacked Matthew aggressively. Matthew was extremely calm as he took 3 steps back. Soldier had already taken his place. In a flash, the 2 short knives crossed each other, and the hand instantly turned into ashes. Hint, you have eliminated a hand of ashes, and your nature affinity has increased slightly. You have obtained a new main mission minus. Main mission 2, exterminate the scar of the dead. Description: the scar of the dead is expanding without restraint. It has even threatened the oak forest that you have painstakingly planted. It is time to pull out the tumor of this land. Primary objective: stop the scar of the dead and prevent it from spreading further to the southwest. Basic reward: demigod power including domain, and a large amount of XP. Matthew's eyelids twitched. As expected, the main mission is connected to the scar of the dead. Even though he had already expected it in the depths of his heart. However, the mission content and generous rewards still surprised him. A demigod with a domain. This meant that as long as Matthew reached the 4th rank, with the support of his demigod power and domain, he would be invincible before non-legendary enemies. If he was a demigod in his 3rd tier state, he still had the ability to challenge people 2 tiers above him. This also reflected the difficulty of the task. At the very least, no one knew how to stop the scar of the dead from spreading. The levels of Jade Court did not manage to do so. The druids of the Guardian Highland also failed to do so. Matthew could only rely on his own strength to explore. This was a rather difficult task. But he had to do it because if he did not stop the scar of the dead, the oak forest that he had painstakingly planted would very likely be destroyed. At that time, his path of nature would be completely sealed, and there would be no way for him to advance any further. Let's go and report to the Lord. We need to set up a new marker stone. Matthew took a deep look at the scorched earth in front of him. Then, he turned around and left with his men. At night, Matthew, who couldn't sleep, stood in the north of the oak forest and looked at the scar of the dead. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that this thing was a huge earthworm. After watching for a long time, Matthew even had the illusion that this thing could twist. Matthew. A familiar voice sounded behind him. Matthew looked back. But the next second, he could not help but blurt out, "No, you're not Ella." Under the moonlight, Miss Owl flapped her wings elegantly and holily. There was a sense of majesty and holiness that she did not usually have. "You're very sharp." "Hello, Matthew. Nice to meet you. I'm Osea, the goddess of moonlight." The owl chuckled. She flew to a rock and stood still. Then, she looked at Matthew kindly. "The moon is beautiful, isn't it?" The moonlight shone through the owl's body, casting a white shadow behind her. Matthew couldn't see her face clearly, but he could vaguely tell that it was a woman's figure. She gave off a beautiful, holy, gentle, and reserved feeling. "Goddess." Matthew bowed slightly to show his courtesy. "I'm here for you." Osea didn't beat around the bush. Instead, she chose to get straight to the point with a smile. "You must be wondering why I would provide so much help for free. That's because I hope to get your help or even protection in the upcoming changes." Matthew nodded slightly, expressing his willingness to listen. The dark days are coming, and Angel will usher in the darkest and most turbulent period after the Age of Enlightenment. Countless evil that was sealed in ancient times are reviving, and the saddest thing for the creatures of this continent is that not only will they have to fight against the twilight creatures, abominations, and other monsters with their mortal bodies, but the gods who fought alongside them during the last dark days will also stand against them this time. When Osea talked about the gods, she did not avoid them at all, as if she were not a member of the gods. She smiled gently. To the gods, the best news is that the Calamity Mage has left. This is exactly the news that the Seven Saint Alliance and you all don't want to hear. But no matter what, this is already an established fact. Darkness and turmoil are coming. Matthew, it won't reach you overnight, but it's already on its way. Matthew asked in a deep voice, "What is the Dark Age? And how did you know that the Calamity Mage had left Danger? What if she turns back and kills the gods?" Osea seemed to be prepared and immediately replied. "The operation of the universe follows a seemingly impermanent but traceable theorem, and so does our plane. Darkness and light always coexist. Before the Age of Enlightenment, the gods and mortals worked together to wipe out most of the dark things on this plane, but they were not completely destroyed. They just hid quietly, waiting for an opportunity to make a comeback. The dark days are coming. When that day officially arrives, the power of all evil creatures will expand to an unimaginable level, and the power that symbolizes light will also be infinitely weakened according to the law of the rise and fall. As for the Calamity Mage, it was her arrival that caused the Dark Ages. If it weren't for the unexpected ascension of the Heavenly Palace, the power of the gods would have been enough to suppress those evil creatures for at least another 1,000 years. In fact, we can't be sure if the Calamity Mage has left, but for the gods who are weak and on the verge of death and still have 100 years of anger in their hearts, this is the best time. They are ready to unite and do something that can overturn the laws of the world. Due to anti-divination, I can't tell you the details of that matter. You only need to know that the Anger continent will slowly enter an era of unrest. Everyone will be involved in the flames of war and disputes. No one will be spared. As she spoke, there was a hint of pity in her tone and expression. Matthew looked at Asiya suspiciously. Did the goddess of moonlight mean that she was not one of the gods who caused trouble? What else? There was a hint of dissatisfaction and resentment in Asiya's tone. If I was willing to join their ranks, why do you think I voluntarily gave up the domain of Moon? I was forced to ascend to the throne in the Heavenly Palace, leaving myself with only the domain of moonlight. Was Asiya the moon goddess? Did she voluntarily give up the moon godhood? Matthew knew that he had learned an extremely secretive piece of information. Of course, I admit that giving up that part of my godhood is the best way to preserve myself in the process of ascending to the throne in the Heavenly Palace. The Calamity Mage made the rule that the weaker one is, the closer one is to the mortal world. Moonlight is the medium that can get closest to the material world, so I became one of the few gods who can influence the mortal world. Asiya continued, but I do not like what they do. I did not participate in the 3 curses, which is proof. If you doubt this, you can go to the people of the Alliance of 7 Saints to verify it. Matthew nodded. He was willing to believe Asiya. After all, it was not difficult to verify such things. So, what do you want me to do for you? Matthew asked. Asiya said frankly. I think that the god's crazy plan is unlikely to succeed. If it fails, it will bring irreversible damage to the Heavenly Palace. I will also be affected. I hope that if that happens, you can give me a certain amount of protection. Matthew was surprised. Why me? I'm just a 2nd-tier mage. Asiya sighed softly. The first reason is that I can't find anyone else. With the heresy and efforts of the 7 Saint Alliance, the gods are completely evil in the hearts of people, especially mages. It has been many years since a new druid was born in the Moonlight Forest. My influence in the mortal world is declining day by day. Coincidentally, you appeared in front of me. The second reason is that I think you have a bright future ahead of you. You have Ronan's Patronus on you. I know that guy. He won't waste his few Patronus on someone with no potential. Matthew was slightly shocked. He didn't even realize that the great mage Ronan had permanently cast a Patronus spell on him. And these words coming from Asiya's mouth could also be considered a kind gesture in a sense. Oh right, is great mage Ronan really trapped in the astral world? Was this part of the god's plan? Matthew hurriedly asked. Asiya blinked. This is a topic that I can't say. But I can assure you that a scourge like Ronan won't die so easily. Matthew understood instantly. He interpreted at least 3 pieces of information. Ronan was indeed trapped in the astral plane. This was the work of the gods. There was a high chance that Ronan would not die. Matthew pondered. He combed through the goddess words and found no flaws for the time being. Then, he said, I'm willing to provide you with a certain amount of protection as long as it's within my ability. However, the final interpretation of this protection is still in my hands. The extent to which I can do it will depend on how much value you can provide me. These words were very bare. But he won in honesty. After hearing this, Asiya was not angry but happy. She smiled and looked at Matthew. What do you need me to provide, young necromancer? Matthew simply asked, I want to know how far you are willing to go for this. Asiya said boldly, if you become strong enough in the Dark Age, you can have a wife who used to be the moon goddess. That's all. Unknowingly, Matthew also became a little arrogant. Asiya looked at him bitterly. Then what else do you want to do? Greedy necromancers. At this point, her approachable aura instantly vanished. An insufferably powerful aura pressed down on Matthew's chest. Matthew almost fell to his knees. I am the moon goddess. I cannot be blasphemed. Asiya suddenly changed into a sacred and inviolable face, and her eyes were filled with disgust as she 100 at Matthew. Dirty and weak necromancer, you think you can get your hands on the moon maiden with your mere second-tier strength? I can crush you like an ant. As she spoke, the shadow made of moonlight slowly walked towards Matthew. Matthew's vision seemed to freeze. The world spun. All he could see was a pair of fair, bare feet stepping on the barren land. Those cute and playful toes were so delicious to him. It's the power of charm. Matthew shook his head vigorously. The domain of temperance was suddenly activated. However, this was not enough to immediately remove the charm of the goddess. Instead, it caused Matthew to fall into a longer tug-of-war. After an unknown period of time. Only then did he suddenly wake up from his dazed state. His back was already drenched. His lips were extremely dry. Matthew knelt on one knee, panting. Phew, the goddess really knows how to play, so powerful. Matthew was shocked when he recalled what had just happened. He had the heart of tranquil water, and his will attribute was not low. He was immune to the seduction of the fairy princess Lulu and the succubus, but in front of the goddess of moonlight, all of this almost fell apart. The gods were indeed powerful. At this moment, he suddenly felt a burning sensation in his chest. He looked down and saw that there was another message on the believer badge. On the eve of the Dark Age, the number of evil art masters on this continent will increase by 100-fold. Remember to be careful of the Order of Calamity. By the way, you have a strong will. I'm very satisfied. Evil art masters. Matthew was deep in thought. At this moment, after being possessed by the goddess, Ella finally woke up. She looked at Matthew, who was kneeling on one knee in a daze, and said in surprise, "Matthew, what are you doing?" Immediately after, Miss L's voice became bashful. "Yeah, I've heard people say that this is a fixed position humans use when they want to seek a mate." No, Matthew. Matthew didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wanted to explain. But Ella said, "At least not before you master the owl shapeshifting form." Matthew was completely stunned. Like and subscribe.